Newsweek magazine ended an 80-year run this week when it printed its last edition. According to the Pew Center for Research, the number of people who read news on a printed page has declined by over half in the last 12 years. The shift in how people get their news and information has dramatically changed the newspaper industry. In Oklahoma and elsewhere, some publishers are working to increase readership by tightly focusing on their communities.
The Tulsa World newspaper has been coming off the presses since 1905. It has been owned by the Lorton family since 1917.
We're the largest locally owned newspaper in Oklahoma. We're probably the fifth largest locally owned newspaper in America.
The World's executive editor, Joe Worley, has been in the newspaper business for 4 decades. When he came to work at the World 25 years ago, the World shared its press with another paper, the Tulsa Tribune, owned by the Richard Lloyd Jones family.
We were in the morning, they were in the afternoon. We wanted to beat them, they wanted to beat us. Those were exciting days.
In the end, the World won that competition by enjoying a circulation nearly twice that of the Tribune. So after a run of more than 70 years, the Tulsa Tribune printed its last edition in 1992. Other newspapers also shut down when economics would no longer support 2 papers in one city. Today, some big cities like Detroit don't even print a daily newspaper. In Oklahoma, the number of newspapers in metropolitan areas have also declined.
Back in 2002, about 10 years ago, there were 45 daily newspapers. Today there are 36 daily newspapers. Most of those dailies that were at least 5 days a week, is the definition of a daily, have gone to 3 days a week or 2 days a week. So they're still there, but they're putting out less issues. They cut back during some economic times.
Many small-town newspapers have also called it quits or merged with other papers. Neighbor News is a company that publishes the Broken Arrow Ledger and 7 other suburban papers.
The TV stations, the radio stations, the big newspapers, they go in and they cover the big news in those communities, but the week in out, day in, day out stuff that's important to the people that live there. Nobody else does that.
Publisher Mike Brown says their business model is a successful one. One component includes the ownership of the Nowata Press, where all 8 suburban papers are printed. Neighbor News also has a growing online audience, which has precipitated a name change.
In the beginning of 2012, we dropped paper from our name. Our newspapers were known as Neighbor Newspapers, and we just dropped it to Neighbor News.
There are some newspapers that have gone completely online. That is, they've moved out of the print business altogether, and they're just doing an online newspaper. So I think that's another model that's emerging now.
Director of Research and Training at the University of Oklahoma's Gaylord College of Journalism, Charles Self, says the original mass model of print journalism is not working because newspapers are competing with the internet for advertising dollars.
You need a large mass in order to sell the audience to the advertiser. So as circulations decline, it becomes more and more difficult to persuade the advertisers to pay the same rates to reach that mass of individuals.
Self says another reason traditional newspapers have lost readers is because many people feel they're not covered by the mainstream media.
So that we see today in a lot of the credibility studies about media a declining trust in news media and a feeling that newspapers and other media are being manipulated by people who have power or influence or special interests of one kind or another, while many people feel that their communities are being left out.
Oklahoma Press Association's Executive Vice President Mark Thomas believes newspapers are starting to respond to that distrust by becoming city-centric.
They're really starting to do an increased job of covering their city and their town in the way that they maybe had not done because their focus was so much larger. Now they're pulling in and saying, this is our real market area. This is where we can really deliver the actual physical paper.
Worley says that is exactly what the World is doing.
We don't try and have a Washington correspondent. We focus on our community. I mean, that's what we know best. That's where our boots are on the ground. And so we spend probably 98, 99% of our focus is trying to report what's going on in our community in northeastern Oklahoma.
Worley says print circulation is still the moneymaker for the World, and he adds the paper's website is increasing its circulation numbers.
Now, we're growing an online readership. We have 1.8 million unique visitors who come to our website every month. And that's obviously, and they subscribe, they pay. So that circulation part of the web is bringing more and more money to to keep our newsroom operating.
Worley says the internet is producing new revenue streams for the World.
I mean, there are a number of people who are not interested in receiving the print product at home, but they very much want an iPhone subscription to the Tulsa World or an iPad subscription and access to our website. And so every month we're showing an increase in the number of people who want us just in a digital format.
The website has changed the workflow for reporters.
On the web, we update probably 100 stories throughout the day. And so they'll continue to update certain breaking stories, and then they'll turn around and start working on their morning print story.
So it's more work for the reporters.
Well, the reporters have to work really hard. They have to be nimble. They have to use a lot more tools. Sometimes they might do a little video cut so that they can use that to accompany their story. They might stop and take an iPhone picture. You know, that's a great tool for us to work with now.
Billionaire investor Warren Buffett believes that model will continue to be profitable. Last year, his investment company, Berkshire Hathaway, purchased more than 60 small to mid-sized newspapers. In a letter to publishers and editors, Buffett outlined what kind of acquisitions his company was looking for. He wrote, "We will favor cities and towns with a strong sense of community. If citizenry cares little about its community, it will eventually care little about its newspaper. It's your job to make your paper indispensable to anyone who cares about what is going on in your city or town." To be profitable and survive, Mark Thomas says the newspaper industry needs to convince the public of its worth.
I mean, it's the newspaper industry's problem. We condition the whole nation to believe that a week's worth of work is only worth $1, you know, or a whole day's worth of work is only worth 75 cents, when really the value of that news is worth a lot more.
There's a lot of information online, but when it comes to placing that information in context, when it comes to digging for information that people want hidden, there's nothing like old-fashioned shoe leather journalism. Now the difficulty is, how do we pay those journalists when we've got a model that in which we're not collecting enough revenue to pay the salaries of those journalists.
Reporters at the Tulsa World and other newspapers now file many stories from the field where they can provide up-to-the-minute coverage of breaking news. The evolving newspaper model is something Worley thinks will sustain the industry.
The young people who are coming out of the colleges and universities that we're hiring today are smarter than they've ever been. They know more about the business. They know more about how to operate the tools. I'm very confident that the future of journalism is very bright in that regard.